Hello, Slush. Let's start with a question. Which one of you know what IDEO is and does? Which one of you know deeply what GV, Google Ventures, does? So I think that we need to start with a short introduction. So can you kind of like give 30 seconds each? What is IDEO and what is GV?
Great. So IDEO is a global design consultancy. It helps big companies and small companies create new ideas and take them to market. And the taking to market bit is becoming increasingly important. When we think about design, when IDEO thinks about design, it's about the idea of creating new revenue streams, new opportunities. I'm sort of embarrassed that I seem to have socks that match this cushion. That's not the type of design that IDEO focuses on. And then Google Ventures. Google Ventures is a venture capital firm. We have $2 billion under management. That money comes from Google. But our job is to help invest in very high growth businesses and where we can support them to support better growth and to make an impact in the world.
You were in IDEO for roughly about 10 years, and actually you are still in IDEO one day a week and so on. But why did you decide to make the change from IDEO to GV?
So to me, the goals of the two businesses, they come from different directions, but they're quite similar. They're about having impact. And I built companies in the UK before, I raised money, I have helped Number 10 think through some of the strategy around the technology ecosystem. And the thing that I felt London and Europe was really missing was some additional capital from a different type of investor. So there's some great venture capital companies here in Europe, but Google Ventures has a very different approach, and I was excited, to use that as another medium to have impact.
You actually say on your website is that Google Ventures is radically different venture capital company. What does it mean that you are radically different?
So our approach, I guess we're differentiated in three big ways. Firstly, we're non-traditional investors. Like many of the investors from Google Ventures are in fact entrepreneurs themselves. And there's some advantage to that. I think sometimes that's helpful for founders to have people with some experience. Secondly, we would describe ourselves as a platform VC if we were in the US, because we don't just write a check, we also support the business. So in the US and now globally, because the team operates globally, we have about 60 people that are supporting our portfolio. So that includes designers that have a philosophy very much like IDEO. It includes great engineers, great hiring specialists. So whereas we only have about 10 investors globally, GV has about 60 people that are supporting the investments. So that's the second sort of difference. And the third difference, the clue is in the name, we get our money from Google. And so we don't make strategic decisions for Google. We never do that. We would happily invest in a business and sell it to a competitor of Google. But where it's helpful to our companies, we make introductions to Google. And I've seen some wonderful examples of that where, startups have accelerated because they built a relationship with Google. So I'd say those are the three differences.
But let's get briefly back to IDEO. IDEO is all about understanding customers, listening, getting insights, and so on. How has your 10 years in IDEO changed your own thinking, and how you can use that kind of thinking in GV?
It's a great question. I think fundamentally IDEO's approach is an efficient way to create value, and therefore it works in startups as well. So some of the things I've learned, the first one, often the big companies' greatest Achilles heel is that they lose empathy for their customers. Like if I could write an index where I could understand how much big companies have empathy for their customers or love their customers, I would love to, because I think those that fall out of love with their customers are usually doomed to fail. And often that's the biggest actual relative advantage of a startup. So, that may be because you started a business to scratch your own itch and solve your problem, or it may be that you just deeply understand a challenge. So the first thing it taught me is the power of empathy. It's kind of the building block of all great businesses. And you get to know your customers. That doesn't mean a focus group in an artificial environment where they give, the customer gives you bad feedback. It means watching them in their lives. So that's one, empathy. Secondly is IDEO taught me that perfect is the enemy of progress. Like, it's incredibly difficult and slow to get things perfect. If you want to make progress, you have to actually get out of the door and test something. So in IDEO, we really prototype a lot. We always prototyped our ideas and brought them to life to get feedback. But increasingly, startups can pilot rather than prototype. So instead of testing something behind closed doors, you can actually release it into the wild to get real feedback. So it taught me that, perfect is the enemy of progress. You sometimes have to get momentum. And then the third thing it taught me that might be relevant is it taught me to err on the side of openness. So historically, designers would often, they'd have a lovely portfolio and they'd keep it closed. They'd never show anyone their ideas. Their idea was just to keep it completely separate and never reveal it. But actually, you need to reveal it in order to figure out if it's any good.
Yeah.
So increasingly, I've been inspired to err on the side of openness. In our world, the people in this conference, to me, one mode of openness is through APIs. It's through an open strategy. Open up bits of your platform to see where people take it. If you look at a business like Twitter, Twitter was built on that openness.
Exactly.
The retweet, the hashtag, these didn't originally come from Twitter. They were driven by the sort of creativity of the user base.
You've been also studying or working together with Clay Christensen, who coined the word disruption and disruptive thinking. What is your take on? Can you plan your business to be disruptive, or does it happen afterwards by accident? Or?
No, so it's a great question. I think one of the challenges with media and the stories that we all read is we imagine that these businesses, these great businesses, were designed perfectly from day one. But all of us that have lived through the journey of a startup know it's a messy process. Know it iterates over time. You know that your work is never done. You need to be increasingly paranoid over time rather than less. And so for me, I admire the idea of starting with a disruptive proposition, but the reason Clay Christensen, who is a professor at Harvard Business School's thinking, I think, is very good, is he forces you to ask the question, are you disrupting your business or are you sustaining to your business? And if you're sustaining to your business, you can grow your idea inside. You can grow it inside your existing teams. But if what you're doing is fundamentally disruptive to your business today, you have to develop it separately.
But if you're analyzing the early days of companies like Uber or Airbnb, they were not planning to disrupt. They were most likely having fun or starting with an extremely small idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think both Uber and Airbnb saw a way to take the friction out of meeting a human need. And often the incumbents, the big guys, the things they think are their greatest competitive advantage turn out to be their Achilles heel. So for example, Blockbuster. Like if we were to talk to Blockbuster 10 years ago, they would say, we're the best because we have the best retail footprint.
Exactly.
We're on every high street. And then we saw Netflix say, actually, that's a weakness, not a strength.
Yeah.
They took the friction out of meeting the consumer need. So to me, it's actually, fundamentally, are you meeting the human need more efficiently and better than the competitors?
Another word that is being overused, as far as I'm concerned, is unicorns. And I think that it's complicated to work in Slush because there's so many. So you have to be watching out that you are not getting stubbed by a unicorn or whatever. So my question in here is when you are analyzing companies, how do you react when someone says about themselves, is that actually we are planning to be a unicorn or we are a unicorn? Or you are having slides with hockey sticks, as we are doing in startups?
Look, a unicorn is a mythical creature.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes these valuations can be mythical as well. They're arbitrary numbers. And one of the challenges that we all face when growing a business is you want to celebrate real progress rather than false progress. And hitting an arbitrary valuation of $1 billion with all sorts of terms attached to it that may mean that in practice it's less, to me is not progress. In fact, sometimes raising a huge valuation can make it difficult to raise money again. It can upset your staff when actually you give them share options and they realize subsequently that you're raising money through public markets at a down round. So I like the fact that people are looking at these high growth businesses and celebrating them. I think the unicorn is kind of a mythical beast, and I don't think we should attach too much value to it. To me, there is no real difference between a business that says its valuation is $990 million or $1 billion and $10 million.
When you are evaluating companies, what are you exactly evaluating? Are you evaluating the idea? Are you evaluating the passion? Are you evaluating the capacity to be empathic? Or
that's a brilliant, so consistently I will value, the thing that's consistent across all stages is, do these entrepreneurs have a commitment to make their customers' lives better? That's the basic unit of business model design. That's the real outcome that matters. Then we're fairly stage agnostic. So we would invest at seed stage and we would invest at later stage as well. And so the things that you look for and you can look for change at different stages. If we're investing at a seed stage in a business, all I'm interested in is the team, because probably the initial idea is wrong. History tells us that. So you're looking at the team's ability to adapt, their commitment to keep going through the tough times. If we're investing at a later stage, then we'll look at the business model. We'll look at the market opportunity. We will look at the actual unit economics of the customers, et cetera, because that data exists. So we'd be crazy to ignore it. So I think one of the things we all forget is actually the things we can look at in a business change over time, and the later the stage of the business, the more there is to look at. So we'd be insane not to look at it.
For example, in your Twitter introduction, the last line is that Tom is a serial entrepreneur and enthusiast. What are you enthusiastic about at the moment, for example, in GV's portfolio?
So I think most entrepreneurs are kind of, I would describe, or the best entrepreneurs are almost paranoid enthusiasts. They're paranoid because they're always looking over their back. Like Andy Grove said, only the paranoid survive. But they have to be fundamentally enthusiastic people to get up and try and solve a difficult problem. And the one thing that's true is, if there's value in what you're doing, it has to be difficult. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. So I think, a healthy paranoia with enthusiasm is the combination that, to me, kind of drives you to solve tough problems and drives you through the difficult times. Some things that I'm enthusiastic, I promised myself when I took this job that I would be a bit proactive. So one of the challenges with being a VC is suddenly you have a fire hose aimed at you with opportunities, and I'm sure there's amazing ones in the mix, but my gosh, you get huge amounts of opportunities. And so I said, I'm going to carve out some time to be proactive. And the two areas that I'm being very proactive about at the moment, and they share some similarities, I think, and they may converge over time, are artificial intelligence. So that would be AGI, artificial general intelligence, which many people would think may evolve in our lifetimes to artificial superintelligence. And then artificial narrow intelligence, ANI. So where in our mobile phones, we have many examples of ANI, whether it be Google Maps or Siri if you have an iPhone. So that's one area. I think it will touch many industries. Yes, there will be billion-dollar companies built, but it's also interesting because it presents kind of ethical challenges for us as a human species. Like, what does it mean for the workforce? Yeah. But the other area is genomics. So genomics is the field of studying your genome. So I'm very interested in kind of next generation sequencing. We invested in 23andMe in the US, which enables you to have parts of your DNA analyzed, and it will explain to you what they may mean for you. The costs associated with that are dropping faster than they have done with Moore's law. So whereas 10 years ago, it probably would have cost us $1 million to have any of our DNA sequenced, now it's about $1,000, and it's dropping unbelievably quickly. So what that means for personalized medicine, targeted therapeutics, I think it will change all of our lives, and it may be one of the keys to unlocking the problem of cancer oncology.
In Finland, some areas we are talking about a lot at the moment. One of them is gaming, because we are one of the world leaders in gaming. Education, business-wise, hasn't been big, but Finnish education system is worldwide known, clean tech and so on. What is your take on, for example, these three areas, gamification, education, and clean tech?
I think it's exactly the right approach. So I think one of the mistakes that we've all made in the past, and I include myself in this, is asking ourselves, how can we be more like Silicon Valley? And the problem is, if you ask that question, you're framing Silicon Valley as the success. You know, we're all as good or as bad as the questions we ask. And if we ask ourselves, how can we be Silicon Valley, we're doomed to be a second-rate version of Silicon Valley. Instead, we have to say, what are our unfair advantages? And if I look at the Nordics and Finland particularly around gaming, you have an unbelievable relative advantage. If you look at the sort of Finnish gaming ecosystem and the success per capita, it's as good as anywhere on the planet. So reframing the question and say, actually, how can we, accelerate the gaming ecosystem in Finland and take it further than we see today is the right question to ask. And we start to see the multiplier effect of that. Like when you have some level of specialization, then you get it exponentially can increase. So if you look at this conference, you could argue that's a spillover benefit from how good the gaming sector is here. So that sort of focus can be helpful. I think it makes sense, and I'm aware of the work you're doing in education here, unbelievably important. In London, we made a strategic decision at a policy level to focus a bit on fintech, which I'm excited about. I think we have some relative advantages in fintech. So I think the way you ask the question is the right way. It's not say how are we a general Silicon Valley, but instead, how can we create unfair advantages?
The last question is about questions, because I know that you're a big fan of good questions. So what is what is a good question each and every person in the audience should ask themselves today?
It's very difficult for me to not answer that generally, but I have to because all of you are so diverse. But I think a question someone asked me recently, and initially it's going to sound a little negative, so forgive me, but the question I think was a good one, and they simply said, if you were to have only 3 months left of your career or 1 year left of your career, what would you like to have achieved on those 2 dates? So if you look back in a year or you look back in 3 months, what would you like to achieve? And that defines success for any one of us, I think. That gives us the metrics that we should measure our progress against. So just remembering that guiding light, like actually what did I promise myself good would look like in a year, and not getting bogged down in all of the stuff that affects us on a daily basis, but focusing on that, I think is probably a question that we'd all benefit from asking ourselves more often.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.